So Sam Hinkie is now on the 76ers, he's GM of the 76ers. He's trying to implement this process, and his quote was always, "We are about the process, not the outcomes." So he was a big believer in doing things a certain way, and trying to get to a certain state. And it starts in 2013. If you could just lay out like general timeline, so like he gets there in 2013, he has the draft in 2013, and then kind of just how that progresses throughout the years.
Yeah, they stink for a couple 2 years. I mean, the funny part is he basically wasn't even there for three full seasons.
Right.
If I remember correctly, the math. Yeah, yeah, it was basically process over results. So we're gonna still be bad, and they draft first Nerlens Noel, who was a top prospect, and that was a fine pick. And he was injured, so that's sort of like a win-win because that means we're getting a good talent, and he's not playing for a year, so you get to get a top pick the next year. Next year they do Joel Embiid. Again, they were more willing, and it's actually a good example, right? They made the right pick. He was the best player available. He went to drop to number three in part because he was injured. And there were injury concerns, which have sort of borne out, but still, you would still take him above other guys. But they had, another phrase of his was the longest lens in the room, right? That was I thought that was a weapon, and he's right that he had the longest lens. It's easier. I mean, that's why it's easier to look like a smart GM. GMs, this happens all the time in sports. The GMs who come in and do the teardowns, they're considered really smart because that's the easy part, right? Oh, I don't have to win tomorrow. It's easy to make smart deals when you don't have to win, right? It's easy to collect draft picks and young players and there's no pressure. That's the easy part. So it's a bit of a cop out, but it's true also. The hard part is when you have to actually start like winning and actually having to make some bets on players and decide who do we allocate our resources to. Sports have salary caps. You can't just keep everyone. You have to actually make choices. Hinkie never got to that part. It would have been fascinating to see if he did. Right, but so his whole thing was longest lens in the room, and he's right. But I also think some of his stuff was a cop out. I don't think it was on purpose, right? I don't think like he was trying to play the room, play the fan base, and run a con. Just it was how he looked at things. But the idea that like the draft's a crapshoot, therefore, to me, it's a cop out to say the draft's a crapshoot because that takes away all ability to evaluate or criticize mistakes. Then, because it's like, oh, the draft's a crapshoot. I told you I might miss. That's why I need 4 picks because I only might go 2 for 4, which I guess is true. But you're also one of 30 people to have one of these jobs. Like you're supposed to have some level of skill and expertise, and it's. I think it's okay to do. And, it's professional sports. I think it's okay to have some. To be judged somewhat based on results. Like I think that's acceptable. Right? I don't think that makes you an ape or a gorilla who doesn't understand statistical formulas, right? And I think he tilted too far the other way.
What was really interesting to me in the book is you go through each of Hinkie's draft picks and kind of highlight their own story and their own personal journey. And it's almost like, to me, I almost kind of interpret it as like, here's the full story on this one player. Because I think we as fans, like we see players, especially like draft busts, and we're like, oh, this guy just isn't good. Or like he just lost it on the basketball court. But a lot of times there's like a lot of stuff that happens outside of the actual basketball game that we as fans don't realize that really impact the player. And I thought it was cool because, like, again, you go through each one of these draft picks and it's like, hey, this player was dealing with this. This is why, maybe, his mind wasn't on basketball. And so like, I was hoping we could go through a couple of these and you can kind of just highlight the situations
Sure.
that maybe they're dealing with. So like 2013, you have Nerlens Noel and Michael Carter Williams. And I remember Michael Carter Williams, I distinctly remember because I was playing fantasy that year. That was like one of my only seasons I ever played fantasy basketball. I was like, this guy's unbelievable. This guy is like a walking triple double. Some nights I'll have like 10 turnovers, but it's fine because he, gets 20, 10, and 10. But he ended up not really panning out in the NBA beyond that rookie year. And the Sixers kind of moved on in him rather quick. So what was the deal with Carter Williams?
They knew they weren't really like Nerlens Noel was the guy they wanted. Like Michael Carter Williams, like once they knew he wasn't that right, they just kind of putting up. Somebody's got to have the ball in their hands on a bad team, right? So they knew that, and they were happy to get off of him. And I think they just never believed in him as a great player, and they ended up being right? Just it ended up being proven right on that one. Nerlens Noel is the interesting one too, right? And it's sort of the backstories. And again, I think this is a fair criticism of Hinkie is like the idea that he and he's not a bad guy. This is the part that gets misunderstood about him, and like why I say he's a paradox. Like he actually, excuse me, genuinely cares about people, and I think he genuinely cared about the players, which is why he made such a wall between him and the players, right? I think he felt like he couldn't do his job properly if he grew close to them, because he's not an asshole, right? And because he would find it hard to sort of be hard on them and trade them and things like that. But he missed some of the human parts, and not that you have to, not that professional sports teams have to sit around and sing kumbaya, but just from the perspective of you're betting on 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, you need to understand them as people and humans, because that's going to impact their success as much, if not more so, than their physical gifts and athletic tools, right? And I think that's where he missed the ball a little bit, whether not understanding it coming in, not understanding. So Nolan's is a great example, right? Just completely immature when he comes in, completely immature. And they have there's these, I think I have to see in the book, right? The fines for being late, the pink slips just piling up on his at his locker. The plane, they used to hold the plane for him. They'd always have to hold the plane for him. Like things like that were just not acceptable behavior. And again, I think he's saying also he didn't believe in the idea of veterans, right? That you need to have veterans on the team. And again, some of the criticism was unfair because I think some fans feel like just because a player's played 10 years makes them a good mentor. That is often not the case. In fact, sometimes the other way around, right? Some guys have figured out how to hang around 10 years, and they're actually awful mentors, and they're going to not teach guys the right habits. But there are guys out there who are excellent mentors to bring in who could really help young players and basically be the equivalent of, assistant coaches on the floor type guys. And I think, this isn't an original thought. I and many others around the team even think it was a mistake not leaning on that and not having guys like that, and on top of having a coaching staff full of inexperienced assistants and a head coach who was in his first job. Like there was nobody there to sort of like the role wasn't filled. And I actually think it's one of the big Sam Hinkie. I never got to ask him this because I would be interested, because one of the things he always preaches is the idea of needing different schools of thought. If you read, and that's like all these people, like the Tim Urban types, all that. No, you don't want to just have groupthink. You want to have people who think like X and Y and Z, and this is the big thing they all preach, right? And Hinkie certainly believed in that, and yet all his hires were the opposite, right? His front office, his main guys were all like him, non-former players, statistical based analytics guys. The coaching staff were all similar. Like he didn't have there were no counterweights, and I think that ended up being a huge mistake. So Nolan's a great example, right? It's completely immature and he doesn't pan out in the league. Can't figure out how to be a professional really for another 8-9 years.
We then move on to 2014, where the Sixers draft Joel Embiid, which was the right pick, like we mentioned. But they also got this guy from Croatia, Dario Saric, who at the time was still holding out and was still playing in the EuroLeague, and actually I think ended up holding out an extra year, which I think kind of pissed off the Sixers because they were like, hey, like, when are you coming over? But Joel Embiid, there was some stuff his rookie year. I think most of us know about the injuries, but there's some off-the-court stuff, and just his story and journey to the NBA, especially the way that you write about it in this book, is crazy, I guess, to put it bluntly. So, like, what are some of the details there?
Yeah, his whole thing is my life's a movie, and he's right about that, right? Like, he just learned how to play basketball when he was 13, and picked it up incredibly. And not just the physical tools, like, he's just a brilliant, and I think he is brilliant, right? And the example I always use is, he's funny. English is not his first language, and he's funny in English. And it's like, do you know how hard it is to be funny in a language that's not your first language? Like, that just shows a different level, or wasn't his first language. He speaks it obviously fluently now, but he was funny when he came into the league, his life, so that part is interesting, and like your joke about, he troll people by saying I had to like go kill a lion in Africa. Meanwhile, he grew up with this wealthy family. I think they had a Mercedes, which is great. No, I have no problem with that. It's just, he knew what he was doing. He wasn't doing it to paint the picture. He was doing it to troll Americans, basically. The part it's so hard to separate. His rookie year ends up being a disaster. He's hurt. He's out of shape. And at the same time, his brother, 13 years old, is tragically killed by a runaway truck, I believe. And he doesn't know how to deal with that. Again, he hadn't seen him in 2 years, and completely understand. Like, that's the most understandable, relatable thing ever, right? Thank God I've never had to deal with that, but I can't imagine what it's like to have to try to endure that sort of tragedy. The problem, in terms of we're thinking from a basketball perspective, is that it allowed him to sort of fall deeper into some poor habits he might have already had. And honestly, I think we've seen today that they haven't been broken, right? And I'm convinced that's one of the reasons why he's so sensitive about this stuff. Not particularly, not that he realizes it, but like if you, he's never grown out of it. And he talks about how he sacrificed and he's given things up. And we saw recently where he had the issue with a columnist who wrote the bad column where he referenced his dead brother. The stuff's all connected, and it makes it really hard to talk about because it's connected. Because it's weird to say, yeah, no, I understand why he had that issue. His brother was killed. That's horrible. I completely get it. But now we're also 10 years later. He hasn't fully matured or broken some of those habits either.
Yeah, I almost forgot about this, but Joel Embiid is the only MVP to never make the conference finals. And that's always, I mean, it's talked about all the time. We've certainly exhausted the topic, but when you think about, even past, this whole process, right, after Hinkie leaves and all that, once Embiid kind of becomes the guy in Philadelphia, you almost have this revolving door of a supporting cast that Philly management, especially Elton Brand, has tried to put around Embiid to try and get over the hump. You could argue 2019 was their year, and maybe they should have beaten the Raptors that year. I mean, it takes a remarkable shot from Kawhi, but you go through some of the supporting cast, and it's Simmons, it's Harden. Now they got a young group with with Maxey, and then obviously bringing in Paul George, who hasn't really panned out, but it's this constant revolving door around Embiid, and you sometimes wonder, will he ever get over the hump? Like, will he ever even make it to the conference finals, let alone win the championship?
No, and again, it goes back to the results thing. I think it's okay to hold up and criticize like that. His legacy is going to be that. Right now, it looks like his legacy is going to be MVP who never made it out of the second round, right? And I think that's fair to say that's a failure. Doesn't say anything about him as a person. He's a bad human, but he's a professional basketball player, and we're allowed to judge him as such.
Right. Yeah. That's fair. Sorry. So Sarge and Embiid. Next year, Joel Okafor, and this one was a little weird, and there was some criticism of Hinkie at the time with creating this logjam at center with now Noel, Embiid, and Okafor. Okafor went through his own kind of off the court stuff, especially when he was younger. There was an incident with his mom, basically dying right in front of him, which is, I mean, about as traumatic as you can maybe get in life. Yep. I mean, I can't imagine going through that. But Okafor was always like this weird, like he could score, but he couldn't really play defense, couldn't really do much outside of maybe a couple post moves. So, like, what was the rationale for them drafting Okafor, and kind of
that was confusing? I mean, I think because that's the one, and there are people convinced that that he was forced to do that. I don't believe that's true. I think he just was going the best. Again, I think you're forgetting some of the how humans will react. Like Okafor was the top rated prospect in that out of his group. I think he figured he would just deal with it later. Get as much talent, you'll trade one, trade two, whoever, figure it out. And again, I think that's a bit of a miscalculation, right, in terms of how they work. And I said Okafor, and there was he started drinking a little bit, and there was a huge incident in Boston. He got into a fight that was captured by TMZ cameras on the night before Thanksgiving. That basically ended up being the end for Hinkie, right? That being on TMZ. The league and the ownership basically decided that was the last straw. This is it. Critics were able to hold that up as proof of everything that they had said that Sam Hinkie was doing wrong was actually happening, and that was it. And again, he sort of dug his own grave on that one, right? He miscalculated a few things, didn't read the situation properly in terms of who he was drafting, the best way to surround them, and because of that, was out within 3 years.